Irene was a young woman in her late 20s. She worked as a veterinarian in an animal veterinary clinic. The clinic had its own animal facility and laboratory that specialized in the care and research of certain exotic animals. Irene pushed one of the lizards back into its cage. She was on her way back to the office. She locked the room in which the animals were kept and walked down the hallway. Irene had been getting a strange feeling whenever she walked the halls of the building lately. "How's it going, Irene?" It was one of Irene's co-workers, Greta. "Good, how about you?" "Great." The hallways were empty. But suddenly, Irene thought she saw something to the corner of her eye. Startled, she stepped back in a hurry. "What was that? What happened, Irene?" "I don't know, Greta. I thought I saw something move." We all get that feeling around here. It's something you have to deal with when you're working with all these animals. I guess you're right. Irene had been working overtime for the past few months now. By the time she left the clinic, it was nearly empty. Irene got out of the building at around 10 p.m. She headed straight to the supermarket to get some grocery shopping done. Irene hurried down the aisles and picked up her usual milk, eggs, and bread. By the time she reached home, it was late, only half an hour to midnight. All the curtains to the windows of the apartment building were drawn, and the lights were out. Irene walked up the stairs. The hallway lights were flickering. As Irene walked up the stairs, she kept brushing her hair off her shoulder and tugging on her sweater. She was getting a tingling feeling on her neck, like something was there. Irene was sure she cut the tag off her sweater. It wasn't that. As she rubbed her neck and looked around, suddenly she heard a strange noise behind her. Was someone following her? It was quite late at night. Instead of lingering in the halls, Irene rushed to her door. Irene stepped inside her dark apartment. She searched for the light switch on the wall. Just then, she felt something go over her feet. Irene stumbled back and turned on the flashlight on her phone. There wasn't anything on the floor. Irene wondered if mice had gotten into her apartment. She turned on the lights and put away her groceries. Irene was exhausted after a long day at the clinic. She went straight to bed thinking she would get up after a while to have dinner. But Irene soon fell asleep in the comfort. In the middle of the night, Irene woke up out of hunger, but she was still drowsy. She walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge. There was nothing cooked. Irene heard her stomach rumble, but she was too lazy to fix up dinner at this hour. At last, she poured herself a glass of milk and sat down on the dining table. But as soon as Irene gulped down a sip of the milk, she cringed and spit it back out. The milk was sour. The smell was gut-wrenching. How could this be? She checked the expiration date at the market. It should have been fine. After checking the refrigerator, which was working absolutely fine, Irene took a last sniff of the milk and threw the carton away. She went back to bed, grabbing onto her belly. Irene had trouble sleeping. She kept getting an uncomfortable feeling that something was crawling under her blankets. Irene tried to rationalize the uneasiness. It was probably the silk sheets wrapping around her legs. Irene's slumber was soon disrupted with the sound of her alarm. She freshened up and went to make breakfast. To her surprise, when she cracked the eggs onto her frying pan, it was nothing but a bloody mess. The eggs were spoiled. But what was even more odd was the fact that the entire dozen was spoiled. Irene cursed farm owners under her breath. What hormones were they feeding their chickens lately? The clinic she worked at never did these kind of things with animals. Irene was left with toast, but even that tasted a bit off. She struggled to swallow down a single slice, and then headed out the door. The day at the lab went by as usual. Every time Irene opened a door, she checked behind it. That strange feeling continued, that something had been moving around here and there in every corner. Irene was tired and hungry. She lost a bit of her appetite after drinking that sip of spoiled milk last night. She bought lunch out with her coworkers, but couldn't eat. She watched her coworkers enjoy their food, but Irene thought her food went bad. Irene ended up eating a few bites and throwing the rest away. Irene went back to the lab early. When she got there, she was stunned to see all the glass cages in which the animals were kept unlocked. At once, she was frightened. Some venomous snakes were also kept for study in these cages. Had all the snakes escaped out of the room? She immediately picked up the phone, but it wasn't working. She went to take out her cell phone from her bag when she felt a piercing burn on the tip of her finger. She pulled out her hand and let out a scream when she realized a venomous snake was curled up in her bag. The bite on her finger was excruciatingly painful. She yelled out for help. Within minutes, her coworkers rushed into the room. "Who left the cages opened? All the snakes escaped. Call the paramedics immediately. My hand is swelling up." "What are you talking about? All the cages are locked secure, and your hand seems to be fine. Are you okay?" Irene furrowed her brows and looked around. She was bewildered to find everything in place. Her hand was untouched. She quickly turned to look into her bag. Irene had only pulled out her headphones. "I don't know. I'm not feeling so well. I think I'll be sick." "Maybe you should take leave and go home. We'll handle everything here." That was the first time Irene had taken leave in a long time. When she got home, she thought she would finally eat something. But for some reason, everything she ate tasted spoiled and sour, not to mention the horrible odor it gave off. Things went on like this, and Irene managed to pull through a few days with eating only a few bites. When Greta saw her condition, she was concerned for Irene. "Is everything all right, Irene?" "I don't know, Greta. I haven't eaten in days. Everything I pick up is spoiled." "I don't know, maybe it's my refrigerator." Greta visited Irene at her apartment the next day. She was surprised to see everything in Irene's refrigerator was newly bought and fresh. But Irene seemed to be saying the opposite. "The food is fine, Irene. What are you complaining about?" "Shut that refrigerator, Greta. The smell is unbearable." Greta prepared Irene some food, but Irene couldn't eat. Over the next couple of days, Irene began hallucinating. Maybe it was because of hunger. Irene saw snakes everywhere, in the clinic, at home, in her bathroom, in her closet. When a whole week had gone by, and Irene had eaten next to nothing, she became weak and sick. She couldn't get out of bed. She had a horrible headache, and her muscles ached. And what was worse was that she couldn't sleep either. Irene tossed and turned in her bed. When she couldn't take it anymore, she sat up, and to her horror, she realized she was in a room infested with venomous snakes. She tried to hit them and scare them away, but the snakes began to wrap themselves around her. Irene was unable to continue her work. She was soon fired. Irene spent her days confined in her house. She was in no condition to go out. She had lost her senses. When a month had gone by, Greta brought a doctor along with her to Irene's apartment. The doctor was highly alarmed when he saw Irene's mental and physical state, and said she needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. While she was at the hospital, the doctors came to realize Irene was in a constant paranoia all the time. Her behavior was abnormal, and she refused to eat. After about a month, Irene was taken to a mental asylum for treatment and recovery. "Be careful when you go in. This patient might try to harm you. She keeps screaming she sees snakes everywhere." Irene Edmond? Wasn't she a doctor? She was an intelligent, successful woman. How did this happen to her? "Hold her tightly. We have to take this necklace off. It's unsafe to allow her any of these things." She was a veterinarian. She just suddenly stopped eating. She doesn't eat anything, saying all the food is spoiled. Then she began hallucinating. she's totally lost her mind. Nobody knows what happened to her or how it happened to her. That's very strange. It's almost like she's cursed. Irene had always been fascinated with the Ouroboros. She always wore a pendant that had been passed down in the family as a good luck charm. It was a serpent or snake eating its own tail. It symbolized eternity, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Irene was always interested in witnessing the Ouroboros for herself, through her years at college and later during her studies as a veterinarian. Ever since she started working at the lab, she found herself a grand opportunity. Irene was determined to preserve the Ouroboros for what it symbolized, eternity. She wanted to study and record it. Irene spent days and nights in the snake exhibit at the clinic, but nothing of the sort had occurred. Irene was at the point where she felt like pulling out her hair. She had to make it work. Irene researched the matter once again. She knew she had to intervene in order to make her mission successful. She starved many of the snake species she worked with. She kept them in confined spaces, while others in stressful and overheated conditions, against the protocols of the laboratory. She continued with her desperate efforts for months. Things went out of notice as she was one of the authorities in charge. As a result, many of the snakes suffered and perished. But after much experimentation, Irene had finally reached success. She recorded one of the snakes devour itself right in front of her eyes. It was a real-life Ouroboros. Irene had witnessed the circle of eternity. But had Irene's fascination with the Ouroboros led her to be cursed? Was it worth being cursed by the curse of the serpents? Click on the subscribe button and check out more awesome videos on our channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon because you know it's interesting.